This chapter we are going to see is the art movement from modern to postmodern. The modern art we learned in the last week was around, it was the artworks arose during the World War One. And the art movement we are going to see today is happened during the World War II or post-World Wars. World War II was brought to a terrifying end on August 9, 1945, when the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city, Nagasaki. And the United States and the Soviet Union had emerged from the war as the two dominant superpowers were entering into the prolonged nuclear-armed standoff known as the Cold War. So we are going to see the art movements about that era. Now let's see the location of the art movements. So the center of the artistic energy had shifted. So several developments had paved the ways for the flowering of advanced art in America. So, we learned modern art last week, right? And the modern art started from the foundation of Louvre Museum in Paris. So the modern art flourished in Europe. And now the art trend had been shifted to the United States after foundation of Museum of Modern Art in New York City in 1929. So this is the timeline. So again, the modern art movements arose in Europe since foundation of Louvre Museum in Paris. However, after the foundation of Museum of Modern Art in New York City, the art trends moved from Europe to America. So painters associated with the first major post-war art movement are commonly referred to as the New York School. Excuse me, let me just turn on the highlighter. All right, so there are diverse art movements, art styles emerged in 60s and 70s in America. So now, today we are going to see the abstract expressionist of the New York School and one of the popular art movement, the pop art in 60s and 70s. So let's see the New York School first. The New York School was a convenient label under which to lump together a group of painters also known as the abstract expressionists. Abstract expressionists were Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning. So let's see these two artists together. So this is Jackson Pollock. We saw his work before when we learned unity and variety in the Principles of Design chapter. So Paul Jackson Pollock was an American painter and a major figure in the abstract expressionist movement, and he was widely noticed for his technique for pouring or splashing liquid household paint onto a horizontal surface like this, enabling him to view and paint his canvases from all angles. So this is his work. Jackson Pollock had perfected his dripping technique named action painting because he's moving his gesture to create something, this kind of color layers. And Pollock placed the unstretched canvas on the floor and painted on it indirectly. So by casting paint from a brush in controlled gestures or by dripping paint from a star stick, so layer after layer, color after color, the painting grew into an all-over tangle of graceful arches, dribbled lines, spatters, and pools of color. Now, let's see the next abstract expressionist artist, Willem de Kooning. Willem de Kooning was a Dutch-American abstract expressionist artist. The years after World War II, de Kooning painted in a style that came to be referred to as abstract expressionism or action painting, and was a part of a group of artists that came to be known as the New York School. So this is his work. Looks very aggressive, and seems like he's using gestures to create this types of abstract work of art. So de Kooning's well-known woman series began in 1950 and culminating in Woman 6 owes much to Picasso, not least in the aggressive, penetrative breaking apart of the figure and the spaces around it. The woman painting is considered as a significant work of art for the museum through its historical context about the post-World War II history and American feminist movement. He once believed the history of female representations as the idol, the Venus, and the nude. Now let's see 60s and 70s art. This is composer John Cage, and he said like this: music and art should be an affirmation of life, not an attempt to bring order out of chaos, nor to suggest improvements in creation, but simply a way of waking up to the very life we are living. So like the Dadaists of 40 years earlier, young artists began mixing art back up, excuse me, with life as they found it, sometimes literally and often humorously. And critics called the trend Neo-Dada, means New Dada. During the 60s and 70s, the directions that have been set out in the previous decade were continued, questioned, and complicated by new trends. So now we are going to see the 60s and 70s art movement. And this is the first art movement we are going to see in 60s and 70s as pop art. So pop means popular. The artists of pop found a goldmine of visual material in the mundane, mass-produced objects and images of America's popular culture, such as comic books, advertising, billboards, and packaging, and the ever-expanding world of home appliances and other commodities, and photographic images from cinema, television, and newspapers. So like Neo-Dada, pop drew art closer to life. But life as it had already been transformed into images by advertising and the media. So we are going to see three artists of pop art. So this is the first pop artist, Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol was born in Pittsburgh to working class immigrant parents, and Warhol earned a degree in design at Carnegie Institute of Technology in 1949, and he was an American artist, director, and producer who was a leading figure in the visual art movement known as pop art. His goal was to become a commercial artist, And within a year arriving in New York City, he had the top assignments from Glamour magazine, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, Martini and Rosie, Columbia Records, and many others. His whimsical line drawings of cats, butterflies, and especially women's shoes made him one of the most sought and highly paid illustrator in the city. After working on Illustrator for only a few years, Warhol reinvented himself as a fine artist. He based his paintings on imagery he found in the American mass media, such as news photos, celebrity headshots, film stills, comics, logos, and advertisement. To convert his source images into paintings, Warhol made them into photos, silk screens. This one we learned it before in the printing chapter, and printed them on canvas. Smudges, misalignments, and inconsistencies were accepted, and giving the paintings handmade appearance despite his use of a commercial process. So I'm gonna share a video on how the artists create a work of art, like the painting work with the silk screen technique on a canvas. So on the floor, he just placed the canvas, and this is the silk screen frame. There we go. So that was the work process with the silk screen on the canvas. So the work result looks like this. Looks very familiar with us, right? So this is one of the famous his silk screen work. So sometimes the paintings include a single image like this, Marilyn Monroe and the Campbell's subseries. These become larger than life iconic portraits, while those printed in grid suggest the way that repetition can simultaneously embed an image in one's memory and deaden its effect. So these brash, innovative works are considered icons of pop art, a movement that both critic and celebrated post-war American consumer culture. And by the end of the decade, Warhol had become a celebrity in his own right, equally famous for his platinum wig and the star-studded parties he threw at his studio, the Factory. He called his studio as Factory because he's using silk screen and he can reproduce all the paintings whenever he wants. And as he was for his paintings, drawings, sculptures, and films, he created that kind of diverse work of art at his factory. In 1968, Warhol was shot and nearly killed by the actress Valerie Solanas, who had had a big part in one of his films. Post-shooting, his work became both more commercial and more introspective. He hired himself out as a portraitist, making flattering images of the rich and famous, but he also made haunting self-portraits that hinted at his purported fear of death. Although he was only 58 years old when he died, he left an immense body of work that seems increasingly relevant today as the distinction among art, entertainment, information, and spectacle continue to erode. Now let's move on to the next pop artist, Roy Lichtenstein. Roy Lichtenstein was born on October 27, 1923 in New York City. And his father was a successful real estate broker, and his mother was a homemaker, and she had trained Roy Lichtenstein as a pianist, and she exposed Roy and his sister Renee to museums, concerts, and other aspects of New York's culture. Roy showed artist and musical ability early on. He drew, painted, and sculpted as a teenager and spent many hours in the American Museum of Natural History and Museum of Modern Art. His work looks like this. It is inspired by cartoon, which is one of the America's popular culture. Lichtenstein used the stencils, thick black outlines, and primary colors, as you can see, to elevate both the commercial images and the commercial printing process into art. He used the familiar imagery to create art that could be enjoyed by the masses after the serious and complicated abstract expressionist movement. And he said like this: pop art looks out into the world. It doesn't look like a painting of something. It looks like the thing itself. So I'm gonna share a video to see his work closer. You know what, when we just see his work of image, in this slide, it's just look like, a part of cartoon. But, when you see this video, when you see his work through this video, then you will see, it's just, overwhelmed and, very, modernistic, but it's very, with the very the easy topic he could create it.
Diagram is maybe a good word for the way I represent other artists. That may be true of cartooning, that it tends to be a diagram of a person. It seems to depict by outlining and delineating in a simple way what a subject is.
The studio was his favorite place. It was the idea that he could actually come down and play. Sometimes he just liked to come down and even clean his paintbrushes and look around at the work he was doing, you know, at that time. Roy kept a pretty regular schedule. I mean, he was usually in the studio by 10, had the same thing for breakfast every single morning, broke for lunch, came back and worked.
It wasn't like I have to go to work today, God, I have to paint today. Nothing. It was his joy, it was his pleasure. It was everything. Sometimes I'd go to the studio in Southampton and he'd be alone in the studio. I'd sit in the little chair and watch him work. And I thought I'd be distracting him. No, I'd watch him work and he was just focused. Nothing to distract him.
He had never really dreamed that he would be able to support himself through just painting. That was something that made him truly happy.
So the question of the hour is, how are you going to work in Rome?
I'm going to do some drawing and thinking and mostly eating, I think.
He was exactly, the first day I met him to the day I never saw him again, the same way. Easygoing, charming. He wasn't judgmental.
I was working at the Bianchini Gallery in New York, and we did an exhibition called The Great American Supermarket, and thought, wouldn't it be great if instead of a regular poster, we could get Roy Lichtenstein and Andy Warhol to put an image on a shopping bag. They both agreed. And I met Roy in 1964 when he came in to sign the shopping bags.
Well, it was 64, so he was pretty well known. He was an internationally known artist. There was still great controversy. It was in the air. Is pop art serious? Is it this? Is it art? All that stuff was still up there. A lot of people were upset about it. You know, the abstract expressionists must have felt pretty upset because they saw their whole anguished world vanish in this kind of ironic and witty and beautifully done work.
What I did in these early paintings was frightening to me, really, and it seemed to go counter to a sense of taste I had developed along with, I would hope, a sense of art. Except I knew it had meaning, and I knew it very shortly that it had more meaning than the things I had done before. But because it was so different, it was really frightening.
He was not a fan of comics. It was the nature of the cartoon. It just seemed as far away from an artistic image as you can get, and to try to transform that into a formal painting really appealed to him. He also found it impossible to go back to doing what he had been doing. I must say, he never quite managed to get the tormented look in those paintings. He wasn't the tortured artist. He used to joke and say he was going to take curmudgeon lessons. When Roy was at Ohio State, he had an art professor, Hoyt Sherman, who was a huge influence on him. Talked all about ways of seeing and perception. He had methods of teaching where he flashed slides in a dark room really quickly and had people sketch them so that they could get the kind of wholeness or gestalt of the work. That really had a major impact on Roy.
When I turn the work upside down, it's to obliterate the subject or to resense it. You can think of it more as pure mark than you can subject. You can see it clearly if you look at it through a mirror because it reverses everything, and anything you don't want is sort of doubly off because it's the other way around. It's almost the same as coming back 2 weeks later or something and looking at it, and you see what's off then.
Art's about something that's entirely different from what my original sources were. And I like the contradiction. I think people mistake the character of line for the character of art. But it's really the position of the line that's important, or the position of anything, any contrast, not the character of it.
Anything that was kind of high-flung always amused him, and he himself had just kind of natural humility, really.
I paint the pictures and he sells them. How's that? What could be better? It's pretty simple.
Leo.
Well, I'll try to be a little bit more complicated, but not too much.
Yeah.
And I would say that there are several kinds of ships that can exist between a dealer and a painter. The best one is the one that's one of friendship, and that's what my relationship is to Liechtenstein.
Well, that's true.
Leo Castelli was his dealer for his entire life from 1961 until his death. And they trusted each other completely. They never had a contract. As Roy started to become kind of more successful and better known, he used to joke and say, someone's going to be tapping him, "Mr. Liechtenstein, it's time for your pills." And he'd be in a wheelchair and with his hat cockeyed on his head. And he would still be living in Oswego, New York, snowed in. And this would all have been a dream.
So that was Roy Lichtenstein, one of the popular pop artists. Now let's see the third pop artist, Jeffrey Koons. Jeff Koons is an American artist recognized for his work dealing with popular culture and his sculptures depicting everyday objects, including balloon animals, produced in stainless steel with mirror finish surfaces. He lives and works in both New York City and his hometown of York, Pennsylvania. Now, he is still alive. So Jeff Koons is he is one of the world's most expensive living artists, widely known for his balloon animal sculpture. This one began his Bronze Hulk Elvis series more than a decade ago. So this one is the Elvis, the Hulk Elvis. So works from the ongoing series of Hulk Elvis range from precision machined bronze sculptures and is inspired by an inflatable of the popular comic book hero and extruded in 3 dimensions. For Koons, the character represents not only Western comic book culture, but Eastern guardian god as well. And he said, they're there as protectors, but at the same time, they can become very, very violent. And the Hulks are like that. They're really high testosterone symbols. And Koons designed Lady Gaga's art pop album cover and exhibited the artwork at Gaga's art rave in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So I'm going to share an interview video about his work of art. So it helps us to understand his artistic point of view. You will see diverse style of pop art.
I really did not know fine art as a child. I was learning aesthetics through my father. My father was an interior decorator, but I wasn't visiting art museums. And you have to learn how to trust in yourself. And when you trust in yourself and you follow your interests, that's really where you find art. If I think about striving for perfection in my work, I think right away of my father. Within our family, we always joke about when my dad would put up our Christmas tree, and we would always have hundreds of balls that would go on the tree, and he would each year dust all of them to be sure that they were really perfect, no fingerprints on them. And when I would work with an object, I would want every detail, every perfection or imperfection of the object. So when somebody would view it, that they could maintain this kind of suspension of disbelief and go along with this abstraction for as long as possible. So there's an aspect of control of vision to be able to achieve something that I picked up from my father. When I moved to New York, I really wanted to move into the objective. I did not want to paint what I dreamt the night before. I wanted to be involved with a more universal vocabulary. So I just started to work with ready-made objects. So there was a very kind of strong, kind of pop, Duchampian type of aspect to my work. And what I really found is that everything's a full circle. And it's like the yin and the yang. And the idea of the subjective to the objective, it's not a line, it's not a linear line that you have the subjective here and the objective here, but it's circular. I remember my art history teacher, the first time ever seeing Manet's Olympia. He put it up on the screen. He started to speak about this work and about the different symbols and different meanings, and I started to realize that this activity of art connects you to all the human disciplines. And I can be having a dialogue about sociology and philosophy and physics, I mean all realm of the human disciplines. I just felt potential that I had an activity to be involved with that could connect me with other people. When I think, what an artist does, it's about making gesture. And a lot of people right away think about throwing paint or, making a physical gesture. But, you can make a philosophical gesture. And a lot of times people feel very inferior to art. They feel intimidated by it. But the art really happens inside you.
That was Jeffrey Koons. All right, so we are going to continue to see the 60s and 70s art and the post-modern art next week. We have a discussion topic related to the pop art we just learned together. So this is the topic. So everyone, after this meeting, please go to the Moodle room and go find the week 14.2 discussion. So pop art arose in 60s and 70s, and it is still popular work style of art. Pop artists such as Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, Jeff Koons, we just saw them, use America's popular culture for their work of art. Please discuss America's or your home country's popular culture and tell us your favorite pop culture with a brief reason. And please, if you need, please attach images to show your favorite popular cultures. Example,